Hey guys, so I gotta rain on people's parade a little bit today, which is appropriate because today it decided to rain and cover my car in a sheet of ice as well as everyone else's car, obviously. But I had a short but interesting conversation with my dad. Now, for the last few days, he was pretty upset for one reason or another, that Trump was winning the primaries. Now you could chalk it up to boomerism, because my dad is a boomer, but I wouldn't be as based as I am if it wasn't for my parents and how they raised me. Now I did a lot of research on my own, and I might even be more well-versed in politics than they are, but here's the thing. It's incredibly arrogant to think that you know better than your elders, especially since they've been doing this for a long time. My dad's basically kind of like a libertarian, and so is my brother, whereas my oldest brother is basically a Democrat, and my mom is kind of in the middle. But he asked a very interesting question, and it was, what if Nikki Haley runs for the no labels party? And he's asked me some questions about the election, and when Ron DeSantis dropped out, he was also upset. So I was curious about that. Like, did he want DeSantis or Haley to win over Trump? And if so, why? So I asked him why he wanted Haley to beat Trump, or why he wanted Haley to be part of the No Labels party. And he told me that he wants a competition. And this is something that Benny Johnson was also talking about, which I thought was interesting. Now, a lot of people were getting on Benny's butt because he was hanging out with Ramaswamy. So they thought that he was endorsing DeSantis because he was giving DeSantis advice and gave him an interview, and then he was supposedly part of his initial campaign staff. Now he wasn't. He was in a picture with the campaign staff, and then they thought he was part of Ramaswamy's crew because Benny was advising Ramaswamy for, I believe it was the third, it might have been the second debate. I think the second debate had Christie. It might have been the third. I have to double check that. But he was giving Ramaswamy advice. But Benny Johnson ended up backing Trump and making fun of DeSantis and congratulating Ramaswamy, but basically saying that this was inevitable. Which everyone knew it was inevitable. So, what about the underdog? Who's the underdog in this election then? And the obvious answer is Trump, because he lost the last election. And it was clear that the Democrats weren't going to let anyone run against Joe Biden. Now, originally, my parents said that they were going to lock up both Joe Biden and Trump, and that they were just charging Trump first, because they knew that Biden wasn't doing very well, but the Democrats decided that he's an incumbent and he's just going to be the candidate no matter what, and basically have rigged the election against Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. and Cenk Uygur. Though, to be fair, it's still unknown whether Cenk Uygur is actually capable of running, and I mentioned this before, is that he was born a naturalized citizen, as far as I'm aware. And the reason that is because both of his parents had American citizenship. But he wasn't born a natural citizen, because he wasn't born on American land, which is really odd. Like, what's the difference between a natural born citizen and a citizen that was naturalized at birth? That's a little bit complicated. But anyways, so you would think the underdog would be Trump, but it's basically been a foregone conclusion since the beginning that Trump was running against Biden. And for a lot of us, especially amongst the MAGA crowd, you would call this any number of things. Revenge, retribution, justice. And if you're not MAGA, you would just call it a rematch. And for a lot of this is a fair matchup. Now, how often does this happen? This basically never happens. You basically never have the same two candidates going head to head against each other for a second time. This is breaking history. But for a lot of people, this is a 4-year-long battle between the MAGA crowd and the anti-MAGA crowd. Because it didn't matter who won the Democrat primaries. It had to be somebody who could beat Donald Trump and wasn't so far to the left that it would shake up the status quo. Because, let's face it, Bernie Sanders should have won, but the two candidates that were closest to Joe Biden in point of view dropped out, while Elizabeth Warren, who was closest in view in their ideals to Bernie Sanders, didn't drop out, meaning the progressive vote was split between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, thus causing Biden to come out on top, since he had no real competition amongst his ideology within the Democratic Party. And there were 50 candidates running in that election. Whereas for the Republican election, there was basically 20 candidates, but only about 12 of them were actually relevant. Now we have, after tomorrow, a lot of the candidates are going to be dropping out in the Republican Party that were so minor that they're barely worth mentioning. And then it's just going to be Haley, Blinkley, and Stuckenberg. But let's face it, Blinkley and Stuckenberg don't have a chance. And then you would have John Castro, and I forget her first name, but her last name is Swift. But she's only in half the amount of states on the primary ballots than Blinkley is. Or, not Binkley, excuse me, Binkley. So Swift is only in 3 states, but she's in California and Louisiana, and the other one is in South Carolina and Minnesota. California and Minnesota being Super Tuesday states, while South Carolina is before Super Tuesday. So John Castro actually has a better chance than Swift, because Swift is in New Hampshire with Castro, and then in a Super Tuesday state, and then in a state that goes after Super Tuesday. At which point, after Super Tuesday, whatever candidate is left is going to have won, basically. Stuckenberg is in 6 out of the 14 Super Tuesday states, and missing from some of the pre-Super Tuesday states. And then you have Binkley, who's basically in all the states except for 2 of them, and I think one of those is on the 23rd, and one of those might be a Super Tuesday state. I'm not 100% sure, but let's face it, Binkley has no chance, no matter what. Binkley, Stuckenberg, and Larry Elder were all screwed before their election really started. So that means there is no underdog in the Republican Party. And there was no underdog for the Democrat Party either. So if you're in the middle like my dad is, who's your underdog? Who's the guy that you would vote for if you don't like Trump or Biden? And let's be fair, my dad voted for Trump in both general elections. I think he voted for Trump, and he will vote for Trump a third time. I can guarantee it. But what about people further to the left or more in the middle than my dad is? People who have like higher, I'm not going to say stronger morals because my dad has strong morals, but a stronger conviction in a third party candidate. And what I think is going to happen here is that a lot of people are going to look at this Trump v. Biden election and they're going to be like, well, this is just 2020 Electric Boogaloo 2. 2022, or the second 2020 Electric Boogaloo. That's a little bit complicated. And it's like, yeah, they're right though. So are people going to vote more third party now because, not because of January 6th or any of the persecutions or prosecutions or anything like that, but are a lot of people going to be like, well, basically, the Republican primary was rigged and the Democrat primary were rigged, so we've been railroaded into the same exact election. Therefore, I'm not going to vote for either of them out of spite. Instead, I'm going to pick a third-party candidate just to deprive someone of my vote, or I'm just not going to go vote at all. And a lot of these people who are like, they could have been Biden supporters in 2020, and they could have been Trump supporters in 2020. Former MAGA, or just independents, or former Republicans, or they're former Democrats who are now independents, or left-leaning independents, or whatever in the case of Biden. So what would that mean then? That these guys are going to sit it out or vote for the third party? So, and then you have a lot of 18-year-olds who are suddenly going to be able to vote. I don't know, guys. It is incredibly possible that for this election, we might get less voters than we got in 2020, which would be very unusual. Because, let's face it, a lot of Democrat voters are just going to sit it out because Joe Biden has been so bad, and they don't want to vote for a third-party candidate. They don't want to waste their time. And they're not going to want to vote for Trump instead. So there's going to be a lot of people who are Democrats who are just going to sit it out, and the only race they care about is the presidency. Now, there were ballots that a lot of people called fake that only voted in the presidential election last time around. And maybe a lot of them were. But it could also be that a lot of people really did just go in for the presidential election. Now, I'm sure a lot of them, at least an uncomfortable percentage of them, were fake, filled out by other candidates. Because there was an election for 2022 and I think 2023, elections for 2023 that were overturned because it turned out for one race, I think it was a mayoral race, where the mayor took the ballots, opened them up, looked and see if the votes were for him, and then if they weren't for him, he threw them out and then proceeded to create a new ballot for himself and mailed it in and forged the signature. Now that is what I heard. But there were several 2023 elections that were overturned. So we know there's actually cheating going on. And it's obvious that 2023 was not the first election in which there were cheating. And we knew there was cheating before 2020 as well, because we were getting votes from dead people. And that had been proven in prior elections. So, votes from people had moved from their state and had voted in other elections and were found to have definitely not have filled out 2 ballots. Because if you fill out 2 ballots in 2 different states, that's illegal. You can go to jail for that. That happened also where some Democrat voted in both Washington, D.C. and the Maryland elections, which makes absolutely no sense, by the way, because if she knew that she couldn't do that, which I assume she did, she said she didn't know, but I assume she did actually know. DC goes 95% Democrat anyways, so her vote in Washington, D.C. literally did not matter. There was no reason for herself to put herself at risk like that. But anyways, like I said, there's going to be a lot of Democrat voters and left-leaning independents who are not going to vote at all because they don't want to vote for Trump, and Biden's been so bad they're just going to sit it out. Some of them will vote for a third-party candidate or may even switch aisles to vote for Trump. As for across the board, there's going to be a lot of people who would vote for Biden or Trump, or did vote for Biden or Trump in 2020, but they're going to sit it out because they felt the primaries were rigged for both of the candidates. But there's also going to be a lot of 18-year-olds who are going to start voting this election, and a lot of them are going to vote ignorantly. And more than likely, about 55% of those are going to vote, 55% to 65% of those new 18-year-olds, or the 19-year-olds too as well, and the 20-year-olds, anyone who didn't vote in 2020, a lot of them are going to vote, like, the 18-year-olds are probably going to vote 55% to 65% in favor of Biden. And the ones who voted in 2020 or 2023 or 2021, the older they are, the more likely they are to skew to Trump. Just because they're going to be older, wiser, seen the results of previous elections, had more time to look into the elections, have more time to hear the information about how bad the cheating was and how bad Biden has been in office. So for like 21-year-olds who didn't vote in 2020, they're probably going to split 55 for Biden, 45 for Trump, for example. I'm just throwing these numbers out there, but more than likely the youngins are going to skew to the left regardless until they're old enough that they actually start realizing that progressivism is not as great as they thought, and that they had bought into a lot of propaganda. Similar to me, mind you, but that's just the way it works. It's just the older you get, the more bills you pay, the more the government interferes in your life, the harder it gets to pay off your debt. You're going to start skewing more towards the right, simply because the taxes are crushing you so badly and the economics is crushing you so badly that you're going to want to vote in someone on the right more often, just so you can have a better economy. Not saying the economy is always bad under Democrats, but let's face it, we were stagnating under Obama. We were stuck at like 1% to 2% growth. And he said, there's no way you could ever have more than like a 2% growth. It's impossible nowadays. basically saying that he was doing the best possible job that he could and that no one could ever do better. And then when Trump came in for his first 2.5 years, he was averaging above 2% the entire time. For the first 2.5 years. Not counting COVID, obviously. But anyways. And then, obviously, as some people get older, if they have lots of debt, some of them are going to go hard to the left because they want Democrats to excuse all their debt instead of paying it off. And those are the ones who have been in debt for decades, for example. Like, Biden did excuse some debt, but it had to be people that were paying off their debt for like 15 years. People who are really fiscally irresponsible and picked a really bad major, for example, were the ones who have gone like far left progressive, socialist, pay off all my debt, please, type way. Some people will actually, while in general people skew more to the right as they get older, some people just go extreme to the left because people are individuals. But I think what this basically boils down to is either we're actually going to have less turnout this time around, as in less people in general, which I don't think is true. I think enough people have gotten old enough to vote between 2020 and 2024 that we will have more voters this time around, but percentage turnout of eligible voters, not including the illegals, because they're not eligible, but the percentage turnout of eligible voters will have gone down. That is my assumption right now. Because obviously people have died, so eligible voters will have gone down. Some people will have been ruled incompetent. Some people will have given up their citizenship, etc., etc., etc. But, yeah, percentage of eligible voters might actually go down. Now, I expect both my parents to vote for Trump, as will I. I expect my oldest brother will vote for Biden, and my older brother will vote for Trump as well. Now, my family will definitely all look at third-party candidates. My dad has been especially enthusiastic about no labels. And to be fair, after 2020, I was pretty excited about Alliance. And I was actually wondering if Trump should join Alliance, but obviously that was never an option. And I knew that, but it was still interesting to note because Alliance was the combination of about a dozen parties, including the Independent Party of New York. And if they got a bunch more centrist parties involved, they would rival the Green Party in size, is what I basically determined. They would actually be, I think the Green Party is about like 500,000, and then the Alliance Party, if they had gotten all the other independent parties to join them, which would make it a big tent, because it would have made it a big tent party, because a lot of those were left-leaning parties. And Alliance might actually be left-leaning, but yeah, I think the Alliance Party, I thought, would be a right-leaning party, but when the Independence Party of New York basically unassociated with them, it became more of a centrist to a left-leaning party, especially since they have an LGBT division, which also disappointed me. And the weird thing is, they're headquartered in Michigan on the west side, and I was interested in actually like working with them a little bit in theory, as long as I got information and I liked what I was hearing. and they associated with the Natural Law Party, which is a minor hippie party in Michigan. But anyways, my thought was Trump comes in, takes over Alliance, hostile takeover style, and then gets all the independent parties, or centrist right-leaning and the centrist left-leaning parties, because Trump is basically an independent, right-leaning independent. Get all those parties together, form a new alliance, which there is a party called New Alliance now, and I believe it actually is the Alliance Party. Associate all of those, and then run third party, basically screwing over whoever the Republican Party was, if not outright destroying the Republican Party and replacing it. That was never going to happen, because all it would do would be like the Bull Moose Party. Which, by the way, Bull Moose Party, still around. There is still a Bull Moose Party. But it's like, I think it only got like 1,000 votes in like 2016 or whatever, or 2020. And I don't actually think it has anything to do with the people that actually formed the Bull Moose Party. I think it's mostly a reference to Theodore Roosevelt instead of being a continuous party that's existed this entire time. So it just basically took the name and stuck it on theirs for the prestige of it. But yeah, anyways, Trump was always going to be the Republican candidate, and Biden was always going to be the Democrat candidate, and people had problems with that. And you just got to get over that fact, is that a lot of people are going to look at this and they're going to ask themselves, well, who's my underdog? And while for MAGA and a lot of independents and a lot of Republicans, Trump is the underdog. But he's also winning in the polls now, meaning that Biden is technically the underdog. Because people, left-leaning independents and Democrats are going to see Biden as the underdog, because he was supposed to run in 2016, and they basically, when I say they, I mean Obama and Hillary basically convinced him not to, and he didn't, and he was going to do it until his son died. So he got passed over for Hillary, and then she lost. So technically, he is the underdog to the Democrats, because he has lost several elections. He lost an election in like 1992, if I remember that correctly, or it might have been like the 80s or 70s. God, I don't remember when his first election was, but he lost miserably the first time he tried to run in a Democrat primary for the presidency. And then he was going to run in 2016, and he failed to even join it because he was quote-unquote depressed and he had been convinced out of it. And then he was told that he didn't have to run by Obama for 2020, but he ended up winning anyways because the DNC basically rigged the primaries against everyone else. Because Biden becoming the nominee in 2020 was not a surefire thing. It was not guaranteed whatsoever, as I mentioned before. And a lot of people analyze this a lot more. Black Conservative Perspective has analyzed this. So, for a lot of Democrats, his win in 2020 was an underdog race. And now that he's losing in the polls, a lot of Democrats in left-leaning independents are still going to see Biden as the underdog. So, you got a lot of people who don't see either candidate as an underdog. You have a lot of people that see one or the other candidate as underdogs. You might have a few people who see both candidates as underdogs because they both have won elections. But a lot of people are just not going to see either of them as an underdog, and then they're going to be like, well, I want to vote for the underdog, though. And they're going to want that to be no labels or independent, or they're going to want it to be alliance. like RFK Jr., or they're going to want it to be the Green Party or the Libertarian Party, because the Libertarian Party had 4 of their parties disassociate after the 2020 election because Jo Jorgensen was too big. She was actually preaching big government in some cases, and a lot of people were like, hell no. Now, depending on what Chase Oliver's positions are, those libertarian parties, those 4 new libertarian parties who are independent of the actual Libertarian Party, might still endorse Chase Oliver and basically come back into the fold. But a lot of people don't want to waste their time in an hour in line to vote for a third-party candidate that they know is not going to win, and then they're not going to want to vote for either the Democrats or the Republicans because neither candidate in their minds is an underdog. Anyways, I'm going in circles here, but long and short of it is percentage turnout of eligible voters might go down, and it's going to make it a little bit more complicated. This is a historic race, and people are just going to be so fed up, so jaded, so black-pilled, or just so sick of it that they're just going to throw in the towel, even if they voted for Trump in 2020. Now, for the most part, more candidates that voted for Biden are going to sit out than candidates that voted for Trump. More candidates are going to switch from Biden to Trump than are going to switch from Trump to Biden. So Trump is still going to come up in this equation as it is right now. But just be aware of all the different factors going into this race. It is all important, and you might have to talk to some people in your family, some of your friends, and tell them, hey, I know that Trump is not your underdog, but the economy was better under him. Please, can you go vote for Trump? You know it's the right thing to do. I know you wanted somebody else. Just try to convince people to go vote for Trump in the general, okay? People who are undecided, people who are just fed up with the whole thing, people who are black-pilled, give them some hope, figure out exactly why they don't want to vote for Trump, and try to convince them to do it. And like I said, it might just be that they're so sick of not having an underdog, or they're so sick of having a rematch that you might not want to press that hard, but you still will want to plant the seed in and just be like, hey, the economy was better under Trump, man. I get it. I understand. I kind of wish you might even be honest when you say it. Like, you might say something along the lines of, yeah, I understand not wanting somebody else to have a different race this time around, but just think about your wallet, think about your family, just think about, and you might want to avoid all of the talk about the election being rigged or the election being stolen by the media. Just stick with whatever argument you think will work on that particular person. If you were trying to convince me, every argument you could possibly give would be valid. But some people, they don't care about certain arguments. And that might just convince them, making those arguments to them might just convince them to give up the ghost entirely. So figure out exactly what's holding them up, and just slowly, not very aggressively, very calmly, plant the seeds in their mind that Trump is the best choice using the appropriate arguments. I hope that all makes sense to you guys. I'm gonna leave this at 35 minutes before I keep rambling, but that's all for now. See you guys.